Airplanes have been noted as being one of the safest ways to travel. And from what I've seen on the road daily, this seems to be true. This is why I believe it's so monumental when one of these metal birds goes down. It can affect a lot of people at once, and it leaves us baffled as to how it could happen with so many precautions in place. No matter how careful we are, mistakes are bound to slip through, and equipment is bound to fail. Today, we'll take a look at one of these devastating plane crashes as we explore the disaster that was Japan Flight 123. August 12, 1985, a Boeing 747 SR labeled Flight 123 was scheduled to take off from Haneda Airport in Tokyo, Japan, about 6 p.m. The plane was headed to Osaka International, carrying 524 passengers, headed down the runway about 6:12, 12 minutes behind schedule. As the plane reaches its cruising altitude of 24,000 feet, we're about 12 minutes into the flight when something goes horribly wrong. 2 explosions are heard coming from the back of the plane that rocks the cabin and terrifies the passengers. Up front, the crew is struggling to figure out what happened while they discover that the flight controls are now not responding. Cabin pressure drops as passengers reach for their oxygen masks, and we're increasingly becoming out of control. The captain calls Tokyo Air Traffic Control and declares a state of emergency. Air Control tells them they can come back and land, but have to call him back just to confirm there is an emergency because it looks like the plane is still flying away. Pilots are struggling now to turn the plane around, and with the inability to do so, there's less options for a safe landing. Keeping the plane up high was also proving to be a dangerous option. As the plane was losing more and more control by the minute, the cabin was decompressed and passengers were having trouble breathing. Experienced pilot Masami Takahama had to bring the plane down low, but their problems were only piling up. In their attempt to turn the plane around, they had taken a route straight into the Osutaka Ridge Mountains. The pilots wrestled to pull the plane up, but it was wrestling with them every moment of this journey. Air traffic control could do nothing but watch as the plane lost contact and went silent. Due to the location of the plane's disappearance and the fact that it was nighttime, it took emergency rescue services 14 hours to reach the site. Of the 524 passengers, only 4 were found to have survived the accident and spent the night on the mountain. The other 520 perished. When they arrived, the people at Boeing wanted to know what could have happened to cause this accident, but the immediate concern was that it was a bomb. Engineers took a look at the shredded remains of the plane and immediately noticed that something was wrong. A circular bulkhead was found in pieces around the crash, but it didn't look like it had been torn apart in an explosion. It looked like it had fallen apart. It had failed at the rivets. The bulkhead is responsible for keeping cabin pressure, and it rests between the cabin and the tail of the plane. Major pieces of a commercial airplane don't just fail, so what could have caused this? Well, to explain that, we have to go back 7 years. June 7, 1978 to be exact, when Japan Airlines Flight 115 was making an instrument landing system approach to the runway. The pilot was coming in strangely, and ended up landing the plane with its nose too high. The result was that the tail smashed into the runway and scraped along the ground, damaging a bulkhead, the same bulkhead we're looking at now. A repair was set in place, and after taking a look at it, the engineers knew they would have to send a whole new bulkhead. Due to shipping problems, however, they opted to just send the lower half, and had instructions on how the Japan team could connect it to the existing upper half. Now, the engineer team had an idea of what went wrong, but they had to figure out what made the repair not hold. They calculated that if the repair job had been done with less rivets than necessary, the plane would have had about 11,000 cycles taking off and landing before it would have failed. 7 years later, and the plane's still in rotation, we're looking at about 12,319 cycles. It was due to fail. After returning to the crash site, engineers did confirm that the repair was done incorrectly. Splice plates had been sent in the wrong size, and instead of just getting it fixed, they cut the plates into smaller pieces in order to complete the repair job. This cut weakened the plates and made it just a matter of time before they'd fail. This failure explained the first explosion, but what about the second? It happened almost immediately after the first, and after closely examining the plane, they discovered it was the tail fin. After the bulkhead had failed, air rushed into the tail and blew it clean off. Now, this doesn't explain why the plane lost control, but the damaged hydraulic system that was in the crossfire when the bulkhead explosion happened does. Now, with all this damage in place, the plane couldn't turn around, couldn't ascend or descend on the pilot's command, couldn't be landed, and couldn't be pressurized. The mountain range was its resting place, all because of an improvised repair job done 7 years earlier. Flight 123's accident did change the way that we handle these kinds of disasters moving forward. Repairs like this and many other major repairs have to be approved by a second pair of eyes before they are sent back out. Hydraulic systems were reworked so that if they were severed in the way they were in this accident, pilots still had some control of the plane. Finally, Japanese self-defense forces purchased helicopters that were designed for rescue missions at night in the mountainous terrain. While these safety measures are welcome, the accident didn't only result in positive outcomes. The Japanese airline president resigned shortly after the accident, and stricken with grief, the Japanese airline maintenance manager took his own life. JAL paid the families of victims $7.6 million in condolence money without accepting liability. We learn from our mistakes the hard way sometimes, and in this case, 520 people had to pay the price for it. May their friends and families find peace. Thanks for watching. For more true crime, true horror, and bad horror movie reviews, please consider subscribing. Game with me on Twitch every Saturday, follow me on Twitter, and as always, be well.